Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining to the fifth open house session on volunteering. We've run four so far, essentially covering a range of topics and areas where we're looking for new volunteers to come and contribute and be a part of the journey. And today is a slightly different session. Before we dive in, it would be good to do a quick round of introductions, and then we could carry this through. Over to you, Sharad.
My name is Sharad. I'm one of the volunteers at iSPIRT and work on policy and other issues.
Meghna?
Hi, my name is Meghna. I used to be a much more active volunteer, but less so now. But I work on the problem statement of credit democratization for India. Kamya?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kamya Chandra. I work on supporting small businesses via credit democratization and other means.
Rishi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rishi. I've been volunteering with iSPIRT since about August 2020. I do all things credit and evangelize the Open Credit Enablement Network, which is OCEN across India.
And Ankit?
Hi, I'm Ankit. I volunteered full-time on cash flow lending efforts earlier on by early setting up the SRO, Credol, and worked on the first implementation on top of OCEN and have been volunteering in part-time capacity on and off for the past few years.
Thank you so much, Ankit, and everyone else. Sharad, I'd like to hand it over to you. If you could set the broader context behind what is iSPIRT and why are we doing today's session, that would be very useful.
So we have three segments in our session today, and I'm going to cover one, and the first one, and with help from all of the others on the call. So my goal is to tell you a little bit about what is iSPIRT. These are the questions that keep coming up. It's a non-profit organization, of course, but what is it behind the scenes? What kind of a non-profit is it? So if you go to the next slide, it's really, iSPIRT is nothing but a tribe of volunteers. And that tribe of volunteers, you have to ask yourself a question: why does a tribe exist? There must be a reason for it to come together in that form. And the reason it exists is that it is actually focused on nation building. So what kind of nation building are we talking about here? And what kind of a nation are we trying to build here? And the nation that we are trying to build is best described in this simple way, that today, when COVID is rampant, hundreds of countries in the world will be giving COVID vaccination in their hospitals. Almost every country that will have one or more hospitals, right? And but all those vaccines come only from 5 countries. Can India be one of those 5 countries? In this case, it is, right? Similarly, almost every country in the world will have a telecom operator, at least one. Even, most will have many. But the telecom equipment for those telecom operators today comes from 4 countries. Can India be that 5th country which supplies the telecom equipment to the rest of the world? Every country in the world will have a digital kind of an economy, right? And they're digitizing their economy. But the protocols that underpin that digital effort, which is TCP/IP, or for that matter, HTTP, the call that we are using SIP, it comes literally from 3 countries. Can India be the 4th country that supplies those protocols? So maps are going to change in a fundamental way in the next 5-7 years. They're going to be not only satellite created, they'll be created by LiDAR and other things. Every country in the world will consume maps, but there'll be very few people who will have the ability to create maps. Today, that's only 2 countries. Can India be that 3rd country? So our vision of the India that we want to bring about is really an India which is able to do these things which only a few countries are able to do. They are in the circle of 5, circle of 4, circle of 3. And can we create that kind of an economy and in India? And if we can, then for us, India reaches the next stage of its evolution. And we call it the next innings. We call it the product nation innings. So this is really, in some sense, the kind of India that we are trying to build here. Now, you might well ask and say, why does it matter? Not every country is going to be like this, right? And the answer is, it does matter. It matters in a very big way. If you are a product nation, then you're a Korea. And if you are not, then you're a Thailand. And Thailand had higher per capita income than Korea, till 1974. And now Korea is 6 times that of Thailand. So if India has to really rise above poverty, has to really find its place back in the world, a place that it used to enjoy, several hundred years ago, then it must embrace this new innings that we are talking about. So then that raises a question: can a small tribe of volunteers rewrite the script of the nation? So I have this iSPIRT mug here. I don't know whether you can see this iSPIRT mug, which says rewriting the script of the nation, right? So can a small team of people, volunteers, rewrite the script of a nation? And we are now coming to you. We didn't know. Actually, the answer was, we didn't know when we started that we could. It was a leap of faith that we could. But today, happily, you know that it is possible, right? India Stack is that testimony of that making it possible. eKYC of India Stack made expansion of bank accounts possible. UPI of India Stack has made digital payments a reality for an ordinary Indian. And now other protocols like DEPA and OCEN, which manifest as account aggregator, and SAHE, they're going to make lending, informational, collateral-based lending, cash flow lending possible. So this is changing the country, undoubtedly so. This is why many people are saying India is probably one of the fintech hubs of the world, the most exciting fintech hubs of the world. So a small bunch of people can rewrite the script of the nation. So our ambitions are big. We don't want to stop with what we have done. We have a lot more to do. So the question then is why are we able to do what we've been able to achieve here? And the way to think of this is that because we are not, some outcome is important, but for the outcome, you have to do something to get that outcome. For example, if you do high intensity interval training, then you'll get good cardiac health, right? So the question is, if you want a product nation, what is it that you must do? And that's what I think iSPIRT focuses on. What we have to do is to bring a new type of an innovation architecture. If you were body shopping, the kind of innovation that you need in the company, in a body shopping company, is different than if you're an IT services company. And the kind of innovation you need in an IT services company is different, from what you have in an IT products company. So the innovation architecture changes, right? Innovation that you need to have a great Indigo Airlines is different from being a successful aircraft company, Embraer. And so this distinction between the kind of innovation architecture that exists in India and the one that it needs is where we come in. And we bring in a new innovation architecture that we call as the Jugalbandi innovation architecture. And this is really the one about private innovation over public goods. So how do we bring that to life? We bring that to life in very practical terms, in a space, that Meghna actually helped us coin the name playground and playgrounds. And in those playgrounds, we bring this new innovation architecture. We invest in those playgrounds, the digital public goods that we've created as volunteers. We cajole private innovators to come in, and then we try and convince, with sometimes great difficulty, the policymakers to set the right rules for it. And when we are able to make all of these things happen, then usually you get the outcomes that you seek. So really, our goal ultimately is to create playgrounds around the Jugalbandi innovation architecture, solving a particular problem. And so this is really what is the reason why we are able to do what we are able to do. So we're going to talk a little more about this. Sid will give you in the next few moments a little bit about the playgrounds that we are building. But really, the purpose of today's call is to help you answer your question that can you be part of this movement? And we have an open kind of a system. Anybody can become a volunteer. We actually provide an environment for you to try out volunteering and see if it's right for you. So we don't pick volunteers. We let you pick for yourself whether volunteering is right for you. But the flip side of an open system is that the bar is very high. And we want, it is almost necessary for you to become a volunteer, that you must be self-driven, you must be somebody who keeps your soft promises, you must have a pay forward kind of a mindset, you must volunteer with no greed and no glory. That these are hard things to do, very hard things to do. And so very few actually end up becoming volunteers, but it is open for anybody to try it out. So today's goal is to help you see for yourself whether some of this is going to be right for you. And if it is, then you can reach out to us and we'll be in touch with you as we go forward. So with that, let me stop and hand it back to Sid.
Thank you so much, Sharad, for that overview. And before we move on, I'd love to pull in Meghna here. Meghna, it would be amazing if you could share the early reframing that happened to take what is this playground view, right? Why did we call it a playground and take a larger whole of society approach? If you could share some of that thinking, that would be amazing.
Okay, Sid, I'll do it in the context of the credit problem. There are many other problems that iSPIRT goes after and it frames it in this way, but credit would be a contained sort of example to illustrate with. So when I joined iSPIRT, the credit problem was very much, aspirational, exciting for many iSPIRTers to apply themselves to. And the UPI portion of the public infrastructure was in many people's minds still the first step towards solving the credit problem. So, the idea that this problem required a whole of society approach was very much there in our mindset, but it was about how we were manifesting that idea and how we were, what's the operating model we were building behind that idea with all our efforts in iSPIRT. So we had we had groups of people who were engaging with banks, and they had taken those banks through the logic of being early adopters of UPI and winning that market opportunity because they were early adopters. But that was separate from the changes that we were trying to get done with the regulator. That was separate from the changes that we were trying to get done with bureaucrats and policymakers. Plus, there were other actors that we sort of knew existed, but we didn't quite know how to give them a role to play because we were lacking this overarching framework of a very deliberate effort over a sustained period of time for all of society, not just for iSPIRT as volunteers, but bring everyone into a multi-year narrative. And, I should recognize Tanuj's and Sharad's efforts in that phase of the thinking, where they brought in this whole idea that, many countries aren't experts in what they do, they aren't leading in what they do just because they're good at it, but rather a sustained 20-year committed, whether it is investment with money, talent, or strategic focus in the country's policy. That the way Japan did it with lenses or China did it with electric buses. There are many examples where countries have taken a 20-year view and committed to proficiency in a dominance actually in certain spaces. So the question then became, why can't we take that view for India on credit and all the underlying infrastructure? The minute you looked at it that way, it was very clear that all our efforts could be pulled in to our playground view. And why we chose the word playground and why it was attractive to us was the idea is that, look, we'll all compete. And that's what drives a lot of the innovation and serves the underserved market. But to first compete, can we all first come together and cooperate and build a playground? Then we can all come in and play. And it was a very simple sort of idea to tell everybody, because then you don't make the regulated compete with the regulator. You don't make the competitors, market players compete with each other first. You sort of bring in everyone to this idea of building the infrastructure first together. That requires a common ambition and a common view of what's going to happen over the next X years, and then commit to building it over multiple years. And I think that was the framing that we used in the credit space. That's what brought the banks and the startups as incumbents and challengers from the market actor space, the regulator and the executive branch and the ministry from the public actor space, the state actor space, and technology standards. But again, when we started framing it this way, we realized there are many layers of players that we needed to bring in that we weren't actively engaging with. Like we had efforts with VCs, but tie the VCs to the credit problem and their role in this playground. Tie thought leaders into this narrative, but with a very specific role. So it just, I think, created a framework by which we could very precisely uncover and engage with this all actors in this whole of society approach. I think it just took it to an operational level to find out who those actors were and what their roles were.
Thanks a lot for that, Meghna. As Meghna shared that amazing perspective on how we sort of take this approach that brings multiple actors, regulated, unregulated, public sector, private sector, technology companies, and beyond, other types of state and market institutions together. What we thought is it would be useful if, from the weeds, we call in and have volunteers talk about their journey so far at different stages of playground building that's taking place. And we have Meghna, Ankit, Rishi, and Kamya who've operated within different parts of the playground, between bankers, technology companies, operationalizing pilots, and then setting some of those pilots up from scale, going from 0 to 1 to 1 to N, and of course with the policymakers as well. So maybe to kick it off, Meghna, if you could talk a bit about your journey with iSPIRT. In the early days, you came in, we had a structure called the FinTech Leapfrog Council, which was one of the vehicles through which we would engage with bankers, and how you came in and reframed that. And out of that, for example, the account aggregator, a large part of the success of account aggregator and its launch is also owed to some of those structures that you set up, along with thinking on how do we work with these very large institutions, market-driven institutions. So over to you.
Thanks, Sid. So my journey started with iSPIRT. Of course, I was aware of their work because I was in the market and I was in Flipkart at the time. Flipkart made the PhonePe acquisition. So it's mostly through the Flipkart PhonePe acquisition journey that I started understanding and got deeper into what iSPIRT does. But when I myself was sort of saturated with what I was doing in any of these private companies, the idea that technology can be used for large-scale development is a recurring theme in my career, whether as a software engineer or as a consultant, and then again in Flipkart. And so the natural sort of space for me to transition into doing something, the idea of service was very attractive to me. And to do it in the space of technology where I had the conviction it could deliver change was something I was just exploring. And then I met with Pramod, I met with Sharad, I met with everybody who was trying to solve or frame the societal problem issue. And actually it was, the initial months were a lot of searching and looking around. Actually, Sharad, I remember going to product meetings and wondering if I wanted to take on an equally powerful tool, which was about helping product companies crossing the chasm or chasm, to take your pick. And that was a theme that was powerful, was there to be thought about, but I didn't have an emotional attachment to it, because there were enough product sort of gurus who felt so strongly about product building that I thought that wasn't for me. So I kept looking around because I thought this is the right set of people with the right mindset and a large enough ambition. And the idea of service was very sort of attractive to me at the time. So that's when I came into this idea of, discovered Rajni's problem statement, which is very popular in iSPIRT. I encourage everyone to go look at the slides about it. And Sanjay Tain tells a very lovely story about how he visualizes the credit problem being solved in India. That was the takeoff point for me. And that affinity to that problem was what set the journey for me later in iSPIRT. Because once I knew I could relate with Rajni, Rajni was people that I knew, people that I worked with, people I saw in my everyday life. And it was clear in my mind, at least, that if we're not going to be a huge job creation market, then we have to be a self-entrepreneurship market and self-enterprise market. And credit is a huge, required pillar to be in place for the country. So in my mind, that theory of change was then clear. My affinity to that problem was set. I could relate to the problem, and then everything else opened up, because then the conversation we had before I was thinking about becoming a volunteer is, hey, look, this is a 10-year problem. Are you willing to commit yourself to the problem? And that was an active week of thinking about, whether I'm happy to sort of fail multiple times, be in ambiguous environments, take on whatever it meant, but commit myself to the problem. And once I crossed that 1 week of thinking, then with those eyes, I was looking at what we were doing in iSPIRT across all our activities on the credit problem. I saw three distinct lines of work. One was a group of people who were advocating and educating the banking sector and the financial services sector on orbit shifts. And that was the FTLC, FinTech Leapfrog Council. And it was very intense about bringing the leaders together of various FinTech companies and banks, and seeing which of the few could be breakthrough performers. So who could be the leapfrog companies? And Sharad, Venki, Praveen, all of them were engaging with market players to be breakthrough performers. Then there was another group of people who were working on bringing more M&A activity into the country. And that was Sharad, that volunteer's name was, I forget.
Sana?
No, Sanat and someone. The M&A work they were doing in the valley.
There was Sanat Rao only. Sanat Rao. It was Sanat and Ashika. There were two of them that were doing M&A work and getting Silicon Valley companies to acquire India.
Ajit, I think.
And they were also going at it very. You guys had just come off an event in the valley,
Yes.
where you were showcasing Indian startups, I think. And
yeah. It was called Startup Bridge India with Stanford University. We would have that. Yes.
And hugely successful. And credit was one theme in there.
Yeah.
But it was largely about building this capacity, this product capacity in India. So a lot of things I was seeing, they were structured around the product, building the product capacity in the country, whether it was with breakthrough companies in the fintech space or in the startup space or with founders and so on. And then we had this one series of meetings, Sid, which sort of just completely exposed the issue to us. We met with the regulator, who was very clear that their job was to protect those in the market. And then we met with the ministry, who was very clear that their job was to expand the market and serve the underserved. And these were the only two state actors. And who was going to bring the market to serve for those that are underserved, which is our fundamental theory about having public infrastructure to drive private innovation. That was just non-existent at that time. There were many disparate efforts, but the idea that this theory was not being served by anyone, there was no operating model behind it, was a point of clarity. It was Christmas of 2018, if I'm not wrong. And that's when the idea of playgrounds came up, which is what I talked about before. And then systematically opting all the actors into this narrative of come, let's build this playground for the problem of credit in India. And why we came up with one particular construct of the policy roundtables was that the regulator wasn't engaging with the regulated on topics of strategic importance of 3 to 5 to 10 years, in our view at the time. It was a lot of here and now sort of focus. And there was no other space that was in which these innovations were being discussed or familiarized with. And we thought iSPIRT is a good third party, a trusted third party, where our intentions are very clear, very transparent. And if we hold roundtables for leaders of the incumbent banks, then we may be able to build a circle of trust and a circle of shared ambition. So even there, we went through a sort of selection process where only if the MDs were committed to this sort of thinking and were willing to commit, a day of their time every quarter, we made it that strategic for them to opt in. And we ran those roundtables for about 4 or 5 quarters. But we use them to essentially educate them, to bring them together, to have a common stated purpose from the market. We brought them together to provide early evidence of market successes. And then the hope was to take this and package it to the regulator and start this tradition of working on things and developing things on the 3 to 5 year time frame or horizon. And this is very common in developed markets. We just needed to sort of trigger it in India. And everybody, once they realized what it was, they were quite game for it. And the idea of playgrounds, I just will illustrate a little here, is, these are all people who are competing every day on the streets for loans, for savings bank accounts, for current accounts, for services. They are competing and they're all public companies. The market is comparing them left, right, and center. But they're also a bunch of people who in their own life experience went through market events like DMAT, like the coming in of the credit bureau. So intellectually, they were quite capable of using all that life experience to take on another set of mega changes that were coming up in their sector. And I think in that sense, we were lucky, or it was a special time where the heads of the largest banks in the country had this shared ambition, shared mindset, and a space of trust where they could A, educate themselves, and B, make bets on where they needed to go. And this was distinct from simply asking different, disparate players in the playground to build product capacity. So once that flip happened, then the banks committed to adopting the next standard that was there, which was the account aggregator standard. And from there on, we built them adopting the credit standards, the OCEN standards. And I think we're in that space now. And this allowed us to frame what the banks are doing to the NBFCs. It allowed us to frame what the banks are doing to regulators. It allowed us to frame what the market is doing to the state actors, and so on and so forth. So everyone was now part of this one playground narrative. And that helped us operationalize a whole of society approach. And so that's what I've been doing, anchoring those players for the credit problem. And over the last year or so, with pandemic and health and other things, I haven't been as active, but the problem is very alive in me. So whenever Rishi calls or someone calls, I'm very up for sort of continuing this work that we started last year. Sid, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Meghna. That's a perfect segue to, in the early days, as we formulated that policy roundtable, one track was, of course, the account aggregator track and democratizing access to data. But like you mentioned, the larger picture was really around democratizing access to lending. And a crucial part of that was has been a set of new protocols for the Open Credit Enablement Network that have been designed and also implemented in a pilot form. And Ankit, you were person steering that through, both in terms of getting the pilot off the ground, the GEMS high pilot, as well as institutionalizing some of it through the structure of Credol. And it would be amazing if you could talk a bit about that and share that journey with us.
Yeah, sure, Sid. Would love to. Just to give like a bit more context in the backdrop before I, plunged into the Oken journey, is that it's been an on and off 10-year relationship with iSPIRT for me as a volunteer in different forms and capacities. And I think of them in sort of like 3 acts. So far, the first one started like 10 years back when I was still a college student. And I came on board as a part-time volunteer, just writing small blogs. Back then in the day, Avinash Raghava was there. And I would work with him to organize some of the roundtables. And those were the super early days where Product Nation effort was just getting set up. I was inspired by some of the stuff that was happening with Startup Nation in Israel and so on. And then just about 3 months back, I met Avinash in New York when Freshworks listed. And it was just great to see that 10-year journey in terms of how this ecosystem has sort of come along the way, and the power of volunteering in the ecosystem and how it can drive many of these factors that lead to an ecosystem flourishing over a period of time. So that was my first act. And it started very small to just contribute in one way or the other and get onto this journey over the past 10 years, which has been very helpful for me to learn about myself and learn about fintech in particular that I have focused on. As part of the second act, then I was a market operator running a payments company. So I couldn't volunteer at that point in time. But then once that company got acquired, then I started volunteering again on roping in more volunteers towards iSPIRT. I did that as in a part-time capacity, but there was this itch to come on board full-time, because throughout that setup, I could just sort of feel that in the big company setup, I just couldn't witness the rate of growth of learning as I had seen previously in the startup, and there was itch to just increase that rate of learning, as soon as I can, and so that's where the third act started, which led to the juncture that you mentioned in terms of getting involved in cash flow based lending playground. And for me, prior to that, it had been a culmination. It had been a good convergence of what I had been doing before. I had been building payments and lending products for banks, for marketplaces, for small businesses in one form or the other as a market player. And then the whole opportunity to work and contribute a bit towards the platform and towards the new protocol to democratize credit for cash flow based lending was just too great an opportunity to pay it forward and work towards it. So that pulled me towards it. At the same time, that was a time when COVID had struck as well, and small businesses were really starting to struggle. Many had just 30-day cash flows, So it just pulled me towards it, and that journey started last year. And then I spent about a year volunteering on that effort full time. So that has been overall a great experience for me to learn and to get. And the way I used to describe it to Sharad was that post working in a big company setup for a couple of years as well, I could just sort of see it in myself, that curiosity and rate of learning going down a bit as well, and which is why it just helps you get your mojo back as well, to be totally involved in working with a bunch of great other volunteers towards many of these efforts. But one thing that I just learned is that the opportunity to contribute at the platform level and it just helps you learn a lot, and then the ability to craft that and how that can shape up so that different marketplace can be made on top of that platform is very powerful, and it just helps you think through first principles and systems thinking, and that has been a great sort of learning for me. So when this effort started last year, it was super intense. I think we all were also just starting to get into the remote setup in terms of how to start doing the remote kind of a setup, because prior to that, I remember a lot of our volunteer sessions used to be very close huddles. We very quickly calibrated to working remotely all across the different parts of the country. And it was a great, intense, learning and fun, joyful experience for me personally. And that the great opportunity that and what I really enjoyed was that in that short period of time, we were not only able to work on fleshing out the first set of protocol for Oken, but then also materialize that with its first winning implementation that we had in form of Gem Sahai. So that whole experience of manifesting one form of what it could be in terms of utilization of that protocol was a great learning experience as well. So that just led me to then again, get that mojo back and then come back again in the field as an operator. So it has been a great experience.
And that sets it up perfectly, Ankit. If you could share a bit about the transition and handing over that happened with Rishi coming in, and Rishi, if you could talk a bit about your journey in the baiting that got passed between the two of you, in the context of Credol, or maybe even in the context of the Sahai effort. That would be wonderful to share.
Yeah, in both the contexts, so Rishi, given his depth of experience in the space for almost 2 decades, then we used to jam a lot on a bunch of stuff, and I remember he and I first had a call when he was looking at one of the product implementations as well in terms of utilization of Oken. And so he was he gave really good candid feedback on it and the utilization and so on. So I really loved the interaction with him, which was quite refreshing. And at that point in time, so that conversation went on quite some time. And that those were the early days where we were just looking at figuring out what the first implementation should be for Oken. And we had look at as a body decided to set up an SRO in form of Credol to house it and to sort of take it forward. So that whole experience it was a great learning experience. We just started off, tried to figure out how to go about it in different ways, and when Rishi came, he had the experience as a market operator earlier on already, and it just clicked wonderfully for us to have the transition as well, and for him to take it forward. So we just realized that both of us had similar amount of passion for like working towards this problem, and we had worked on it in different ways as market operators, and it just attracted both of us together to it. And in terms of transition, it worked out well in terms of us being there. We spent some time on working with different market players, and that was one of the other joys of the full-time experience that was there for me, in terms of just engaging with many market players in terms of thinking through what the use cases could be for them. And Rishi and I really loved and enjoyed those interactions with many players, which we believe were quite helpful for them to think through how they can embed credit for their own use cases. And I think I left pretty early in the Credol journey, so Rishi has taken it up further ahead beyond that. So would love for him to add more and share more on the story that went beyond that.
Sure. So hi guys. So I'll take a moment and even give like my journey in the discovery of iSPIRT. And actually, mine started pretty late. I guess I first heard of iSPIRT in 2017 because I used to I've spent a majority of my time at Sybil, and Sid had actually come and presented at one of our board meetings, and I remember. We'd all heard of Aadhaar, obviously, but UPI, I think, was relatively new at the time. And he had even talked about the NBFC account aggregator and this DEPA concept. And, as market practitioners, we're obviously looking at the next 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. And I remember all of us sitting there thinking that, that yeah, this is great, it's probably going to happen, but God knows when it'll happen, right? And little did we know that UPI 2 years later would explode. That DEPA now is a reality in account aggregator. And I remember doing the NBFC account aggregator standards were out. I remember reading it, and then it went on a pile, because then you went back to your monthly and your 3 monthly considerations, and that's where I left it. And then fast forward like 2 or 3 years, I had moved on from Sibyl, and I was running a lending marketplace, and COVID hit, and it was pretty hard for the business, and we started looking for something else to do. And as luck would have it, and I'll quote Kamya here, when your cause, or at least your intent, is just, the universe tends to be very benevolent. So randomly, a friend of mine actually sent me the first OCAN open house, right? The YouTube link to it, and he's like, Rushi, I think you'd like this. It's some of the problems you were describing and how to solve them. So I had a look at it. And that's when I went back to the iSPIRT website, did all the research, and I actually chanced upon Sharad's email address, right, on the website. And I wrote in saying that I'd like to volunteer with a few suggestions, with the various things you're doing, given like all the market experience. And that's where my dialogue with Sharad and Sid started on this lending piece. So, for a few months, we did this thought, various thought experiments, that sort of thing. And I wasn't doing anything at the time. And very frankly, at that time, it felt right to me, right? Like I suddenly knew that this is what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure at the time if iSPIRT would have me, right? So it kept,
Sorry, one sec, Rishi, you should tell the story where you messaged with a regular intro, and then you didn't get a reply, and then what you did after that to actually.
Yeah. So I mean, I first sent an email just saying like, look, I have all this experience. I'm happy, like this looks like the future, and I'm happy to contribute in whatever form or fashion. And I actually didn't get a response for a week or two, and I was like, okay, and then I watched the second open house, and I saw a few, things that I thought could be done differently. And this was to do with the public credit registry and some of the lending things on OCAN. And I got a response from that. So the short answer is, well, this is a techno-legal think tank, but more specifically, it's a think and do tank. So if you're on the front foot and willing to do stuff, you'll be a better fit here than just thinking and leaving your thoughts in a piece of paper, right? So as luck would have it, I was at the time even thinking about starting something in this OCAN space, right? As I was doing the research and balloon volunteering till about December. And I remember calling Ankit, and I'm saying like, Ankit, man, like, this is all great, but how do you formally engage? And I remember Ankit sheepishly telling me that, yeah, man, we don't have it all built out yet. So I was just thinking, would you like to come and help build it out? So I was like, I was taken aback for a second. And then I'm like, oh, so you mean build the infrastructure? And I think he put it very succinctly, which made it very hard then to do anything else. And he said, this is sort of what UPIs to payments, OCAN will be to OCAN, and account aggregator will be to credit. And I was like, okay, so, that just put it in context for me. And I was like, yeah, that's going to be a huge deal going forward. And then one of the things for me, and this is more a personal thing, like, I was at Sibyl at 2004 when the bureau first took root, right? And the ethos at the time was like, we are doing this to provide information collateral, to be able to speed up credit decisions, make them machine driven. But it was in a specific silo, and it was solving the need of that time. When you fast forward to what we're trying to achieve now with account aggregator and OCAN, that's at a countrywide scale. And like, what is, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I'll state it. But the only way you serve the smaller ticket customers in banking and lending, or in wealth, or, in specifically, is if you do it through technology. Because having people, like, you'll have suited and booted bankers going to people who have money, who probably don't need it, and offering them credit. But you never have that for the small guy who needs the money, right? So the only way you're going to solve that through is technology. So it fit my, what I wanted to do, plus it's solving a problem. And, again, to quote, like, probably one of the greatest entrepreneurs all time, like the quote Steve Jobs, is like leaving your dent in the universe. And there's no better place that you can be able to do it, not, given the quality of the people, the quality of the thinking. And, I'll describe when I start talking about setting up and moving Gem Sahay forward and getting Credol off the ground is the general ferocity of and purpose that you need to have to keep going, right? Because initially moving something to 0 to 1 tends to be very, very challenging, but then it starts picking up pace as other people do it. So I think that's a good segue into where, when I, Ankit started helping me with the transition from like as he was stepping out and I was stepping in. So obviously I spent a lot of time understanding the concept, the context of where we were, and there were multiple challenges at that time, right? So the pandemic was one of them. So there was a resource constraint at the lender's end. See, the other major thing for a lot of what we do is a belief issue when there are things at a concept stage. So you have a few firms who we call the Wave Zero partners who tend to take the leap of faith with us and believe that this is possible. So, and when I say what do we believe is possible is, can we give a 500 rupee loan in a commercially effective or efficient manner in less than 10 minutes? About 10, 12 months ago, that was an idea, a concept that we would sell. It was very coherently and logically thought through. It was very well, you had a user flow and everything was mapped, but it wasn't real. And, the 0 to 1 was making that real, where like Ankit and I actually transitioned. I think it was a little bit of a difficult transition because it was remote. It's sometimes easier to sit face to face and have extended conversations, but obviously that was not possible at the time. And plus, it's a very complex thing to try to do, right? Also, there are introductions to all these ecosystem players. They've been used to working with Ankit for like over a year. Now, suddenly there's this new guy. And, we had been quiet as well because of the resource constraints, at the lender's ends, at our own end. So it was also somewhat reviving that project. So that was the initial challenge. And even when we went live, right, with Sahay itself, it was very challenging. So for example, it took us 1 month to give the first loan. Right. And the reason for this is the tech issues, the credit policy is not sorted out at the lender's end. And as time progressed and we added, so now we have 3 lenders on there, the first loan took 3 days to give, right? So you are able to crunch the time as you learn and you do more, but it is ambiguous by nature, as Meghna mentioned. It sometimes feels very uncertain, but the path to doing it is clear, right? Because you've thought it through so deeply. The devil is obviously in the execution and the detail. And you get lots of questions. You're interacting with a lot of the market, which are lenders, which are the loan service providers or fintechs who want to be part of the ecosystem. And since there's such few of us as well, sometimes, and I'll be honest, we are maybe not as good as putting stuff out there in the public domain as we should be in some cases. So what we try to do is talk a lot to people, but that's sometimes not enough, right? Because now people are researching the content we put out there. And sometimes, I said things obviously move slowly, but sometimes they move in great bursts of activity. So for example, our first phase was Gem Sahay, and that's live, and we are expanding the program now. And, we were searching for a way to get GST Sahay going. And like I said earlier, the universe is benevolent. And, we actually talked with SIDBI, and in 4 weeks, we had a signed MOU, and we started work on building GST Sahay with a path to getting out there by the end of February 2022. And that happened in a space of 4 weeks, right? So, sometimes you really work hard to make something move, and then it moves very quickly. So it is a very startup-y experience, but at a scale which is at a country level, right? So, I love doing this. I actually feel fortunate to have been given and gotten this opportunity to do this for the next couple of years. Hope to set up the ecosystem till it's healthy, and then move on to whatever we end up doing. Just to put in a closing thought. See, it is sometimes a wandering experience, and you tend to have to trust that it's ambiguous by nature because of the scale of what you're trying to accomplish. But you just trust that it works, and you keep that focus and ferocity on trying to make it happen, and it just does. So, I mean, in closing, I don't think you'd find a more rewarding experience if you did this full time almost anywhere else. And obviously, that's a biased opinion given that I am sitting here. But I would strongly encourage you, if, like, what you've heard appeals to you, to reach out and talk more, and then we can take it from there. So I think that's my piece. Kamya, I guess, Sid, Kamya, over to you guys.
Thanks, Rishi. Yep, we can jump straight to Kamya. And Kamya, if you could share, especially your thinking on the policymaker aspects, how do we engage with them and orchestrate across those state players? It would be absolutely fascinating.
Awesome. So I'll split this up by also into two parts. The first bit on like how I joined, which I think is interesting for everyone who's listening because they're also thinking about joining. So, and then the second bit, I'll sort of go into the policy piece and how we sort of reshape that puzzle, right? So in terms of how I joined, like personally, I'm actually not a technologist. I'm an economist and political scientist by training. So I, was always interested in national scale impact. Like that's what appealed to me most. And so ironically, I never thought of myself as a nonprofit person. I thought I would always end up in government or like work via massive international institutions. I used to work at the World Bank. And so we would sort of drive national economic agendas via these huge projects, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that's what really appealed to me. Sort of, I thought that was the way to sort of move the needle forward. And when I was actually in DC, I heard about all of the work that was happening in India around Aadhaar. I joined a team there that actually thought about, it's called Identification for Development, and thought about how to bring this idea of unique digital identification sort of to other countries and sort of take the India experience outward. So that was the first time where I sort of interacted with this concept of the unique power of a digital platform to actually achieve national level scale. And I was super sort of inspired by that idea and sort of moved to Bangalore to join this what seemed like a motley crew of like geniuses who were sort of like orchestrating and pulling the strings to actually build things like Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, eSign, eKYC, all of these super sort of large game-changing projects. And then since I've come in, it was sort of an ambiguous, I won't say that it was super effortless or easy at the start. I think it's an adjustment to go from being a person who is sort of in a larger corporate setting into this sort of self-driven sort of description that Sharad alluded to earlier, right? Because it does take sort of a different mold to do that work of rewriting the script of the nation as we sort of ambitiously try to do. And so I think once we got here, the starting sort of mold in which we looked at policy, just because many of us, were technologists, was that we would be policy recommenders and not sort of implementers, right? We directionally tell the government sort of what's needed and say like, okay, now the lawyers and the regulators need to figure out the details. I think that was sort of our framing before we got here. And then I think slowly going through the journey along the last 2 years, we sort of realized, no, there's actually no, we were afraid in some sense of going so deep into the law or of going so deep into how a regulator has to think or going so deep into how a bureaucrat is incentivized by the institutions around them. And so we would sort of give like a high level recommendation and say, look, this is what needs to be done in order for the market to take off, and please do it, right? And I think the shift that's happened in the last 2 years is to say, actually, we need to go super deep into the level of like the exact language of the legal change that's required that will actually move this forward, just because every type of entity has their own as Meghna sort of talked about the playground, right? Every player in the playground has a role to play, but they also have a specific sort of agenda, right? Or a specific view or lens of looking at the world. And iSPIRT's role, actually, the what makes us special and what makes us think about the 10-year journey is that we are prioritizing that 10-year journey above any individual lens. And so actually we're really good at talking to the lawyers, getting their perspective, and then talking to the regulator, getting their perspective, talking to the market player, getting their perspective, going back to the bureaucrat, getting their perspective, and then finding that sort of policy change that will actually meet the basic requirements for everybody, right? So that sort of neutral sort of arbiter role is one that we're actually decently good at. So I think the first big shift that we made from a policy perspective is to say, look, actually, we're not just going to be directional recommenders, we're going to be solution finders even in the policy space. And so that's how you saw sort of some of the early sort of changes that we tried to push through. We sort of crafted to the level of the detail of the new regulatory change or act that we were trying to push through. The second was sort of, I think, comes down to sort of a deeper understanding of the audience. We saw ourselves earlier, I think, as a bit of the other, right? The government is a big, scary entity to work with for most, private players. We don't really understand it. We have a tendency to make generalizations about it. But actually, the government, just like any other set of institutions, right, just like any large private bank or large, private startup, has its own incentives and organization structure and people within the government who will drive a change forward. So I think because we sort of shifted to operating on sort of a people-driven, champion-led effort, right? Because of that deeper understanding, we started this sort of multi-vector policy effort, right? Before, I think we were sort of focused on saying, okay, look, we have this one person who we work with very closely, and they're our champion, and we're going to put all of our eggs in sort of one basket because that's the institution that has to make it happen. But I think what we realized over time, collectively, is that the way to actually deliver policy change is to have multiple vectors with different people at different institutions, up from, for example, with RBI, all the way from the governor down to like at multiple ranks, right, within an organization, and then laterally sort of across the Ministry of Finance, RBI, SIDBI and others. And actually that has a compounding effect on the way your policy changes move, because they sort of end up speaking to each other, and it reinforces the reality of an idea as it goes from concept to sort of implementation. So I think those are sort of the two or three big shifts that have happened in the way that we've done policy. The one thing about sort of volunteering around the policy work, though, is that it is, and I've again talked to Rishi about this before, is that I get impatient. I'm like, oh, they're taking so long, and how do we move this faster? And we're always on this quest. But I do think that they when we have the champions that we work with, and we have true converts, right, who really believe in the power of the idea, it will come to life. It's a matter of sort of being patient and never letting your own energy level down. You have to sort of keep pushing on multiple different vectors, and it will come to life. You sort of have to have that conviction. So I'll sort of stop there. I think that's a useful but brief overview.
Thank you, Kamya. So as you just heard from Meghna, Kamya, Rishi, and Ankit, we go through many stages as we build out these playgrounds. Now, one of the playgrounds we did touch upon quite a bit was the whole credit playground. That forms an important part of our efforts to bring about financial inclusion in India. But in addition to financial inclusion, we've also been working on health inclusion and logistics. And you could think of this as a set of 4 stages. All of these get built first at a conceptual level. So for example, there are efforts now as part of the crypto ecosystem to see how do we leverage blockchains and related cryptocurrencies and other primitives, crypto primitives, to actually enhance trust across all goods and services transactions in India. There's work happening on building out an agricultural stack. Some of you may have heard about the recent map liberalization that happened, where the policy essentially opened it up for, in a very easy manner, Indian companies to map out and create high-dimensional, high-fidelity maps that could be used to serve a range of purposes. As we know, India is severely under-mapped. But it really needs to be taken to the next stage, because conceptually this is there, the policy is in place for many of these, but how do you really take it to the next stage where we actually have mapping taking place, for example, through the use of drones? That's really where the wave 0 or stage 2 comes in. Out here, we start to pull in a few market players. Rishi touched upon the wave 0, wave 1 concept, where really in wave 0, these are people getting in at the shop floor. The end is not clear, but they're willing to contribute, because being a part of that public infrastructure building is very valuable as these go on to get commercialized in the years to come. And so our efforts around telecom data, the account aggregator has gone live for financial data, but there's a similar effort by TRI for telecom data. There's an effort to globalize what we've done on the account aggregator in India and take it to other countries. And there's active conversations happening with the EU, Australia, France, Japan, Rwanda, and many others around this globalization of these protocols. Similarly, extending the map policy using drones, that's where Digital Sky comes in. And there's an active room thinking about how do we, not just in the context of mapping, but what is the core unmanned traffic management infrastructure, UTM infrastructure that India needs to allow for safe integration of drones into civilian airspace at scale. And in addition to democratizing access to personal data, there's also an effort underway to democratize access to anonymized data. This is the training cycle for it. So you have training and then you have inference. And for the inference stage, you need access to personal data, but for the training stage, you really need access to large amounts of anonymized data. And that's where early thinking is taking place. All of these are what we would call at the playground design stage. And once that's kind of put in place, we then move towards a pilot stage where we try to implement this on the ground. DEPA for Health, for example, is in the pilot stage. GEM Sahay and GST Sahay are now at a pilot stage. The building blocks are in place. Loan transactions are flowing through. E-Rupee, e-vouchers is being piloted with a few banks and so on. And then once these emerge from a pilot stage and they have stabilized, we then move towards a more one-to-one sort of scale stage. That's where the account aggregator is. It came out of its pilot, got launched publicly on 2nd September earlier this year. And now it's really being scaled up across public, private sector banks and many consumers coming on board. We recently crossed over 100,000 transactions. GEM Sahay is in a similar phase where the pilot, it emerged recently from the pilot stage. And now that it's stabilized, we're looking at scaling it out across all transactions as part of the GEM system where MSMEs can obtain financing. And so therefore, these are a range of areas where we are looking for new volunteers. And if what was shared earlier by our other volunteers around, how we think about building the various values that we ascribe as part of this journey, then feel free to reach out. And you can have, you may fit into any part of this puzzle. We have a broad spectrum of volunteers and their archetypes. It may be people interested in doing only the deep research and building this out. It could be people that want to take what's been built out and evangelize it amongst market players or evangelize it amongst broader society as well. It could be individuals that are interested in working on policy or broadly even just orchestrating the various actors across the ecosystem. So there are many archetypes that you could fill, or in fact result in the creation of a new archetype. And if you want to volunteer, go to volunteers.iSPIRT.in. You'll have a Google form out there that you can fill out, and Pratibha will reach out to you and have a set of conversations with you, and based on those conversations, connect you with the right anchor volunteers, and based on that, you could either get started or maybe it's not a right fit. But that's what the journey of balloon volunteering is all about. Before I end, would love to ask Kamya, Ankit, Rishi, Meghna, anything else you'd like to add? Karthik as well.
No, I think the last thing to sort of say is you sort of get from iSPIRT what you put into it, right? So I think anyone here in the audience who's sort of been maybe inspired or just curious and wants to have fun while you work on a tough problem that could potentially have impact, would have to sort of make it their own to make it worthwhile, right? So I think while it's sort of tempting to, when anything is sort of a nonprofit or social impact oriented piece, to sort of do it on the side, I think there is value to that, of course, and doing, sort of nuggets of contribution here and there. But it's sort of that Lincoln thing where it's like, ask not what the nation can do for you, ask what you can do. But we'd go even beyond that and just say, just do, right? Just see what you can do, rather than asking for permission to sort of join. So I think the way that we would sort of frame it is, if there's a piece of the problem that you're really inspired by, that's close to your heart, and you know what that is for you, like you're part of your personal journey on what you've worked on what you care about. If there's something that's personal to you that really matters, and you think that there's potentially an infrastructure play, a platform play, then sort of get in touch and we'll help you bring it to life, rather than sort of us, you help us do something, right? So I think that is sort of how we'd frame our work here. I don't know if I've misspoken. Anyone should correct me.
No, that's beautiful. Okay, that's a wrap then. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for listening in. Take care.